Welcome everyone to another one of the Will Talks, and welcome to our guest today, Crystal Moll. Crystal is one of the juried artists who will be participating in this year's Paint Annapolis. And for many of you who are going to watch this, you'll know that Paint Annapolis is a major event for Paint Annapolis and the city of Annapolis as well every June. And you may know Crystal. She is an artist who's based in Baltimore with her gallery, and she's been very successful as a plein air painter in lots and lots of these competitions. So, Crystal, welcome.
Oh, so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Plein air painting, at least to me and to I think most people who are familiar with the term, it says painting out of doors, painting rapidly, and being confident in what you're doing. But a little bit of what I've read about you from your website suggests that maybe you're not the typical plein air painter. So you want to say a little bit about how you approach the art of plein air?
Yes, I think I'm not your typical plein air painter, especially for events. When I first started painting on location, I just treated it like the outdoors were my studio. Didn't matter how many times I went back to a site in order to complete a painting. Often it can be a dozen times to complete a painting. So I'm not really built for plein air events because I freak out if it rains for 2 days and I can't wait for the perfect weather. So they're a real challenge for me to try to get the 2 or 3 paintings that are required for the 3 or 4 or 5 days that are required to have completed. But it's also a good challenge, and I love being around the other artists. So I only do a couple of them a year, to put myself in that position, and then the rest of the year I paint at my own pace.
Well, I'm really glad to have learned that about you because I do notice, and we'll see it when we look at a couple of your existing works, that there's a kind of a finished level that's not as impressionistic. So many plein air painters today are very impressionistic with loose brushwork. Uh, and the other thing I wanted to ask you as we begin is, uh, I know that you're on your boat because we talked about this, but you can see the canopy and some of the struts, and you can also see the water and the houses and vegetation on the other side. So you live on the water, right?
Well, our neighborhood is surrounded by water, so we're not waterfront, but we live in Middle River. And when you moved into this neighborhood, you could buy a slip to put your boat in. So we're fortunate to have a nice boat that we literally just brought back today from South Carolina, where it was for the winter. And my hope is that I'll be going to Paint Annapolis on the boat this year.
Oh,
But
great.
it is a boat, and often things go wrong, so you never know that
Yeah,
everything will be working.
yeah, yeah.
I've actually painted in Paint Annapolis on the boat a couple of times in the past, actually on my previous boat. So this would be the first time doing it on this boat.
Well, that raises a couple to me very interesting questions. A lot of the people that I've interviewed who are participating in Paint Annapolis, or people I've talked to while I walk around during the event, um, it's the attraction of the water for them because they don't live on the water or they don't live that close to the water. So it gives them, all of those effects of light and color that come with the moving surface of the water and the clouds and the changing light. But you live on the water. So what's the appeal, or you have a slip and you're on the water a lot, I should say. Uh, what's the appeal of Paint Annapolis for you?
Well, what's funny is, I actually paint mostly urban landscapes. I don't usually paint water scenes. And so I'm really drawn to the historic buildings in the city. But when I still also paint some of the water scenes. So if I do go by boat, I'll certainly be painting from this vantage point or I'll be mixing it up, let's say.
Uh-huh.
It just gives me another challenge to my event.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting, and I can appreciate that. Since I retired, I'm a photographer of some sorts, and I really like to take photographs of architecture. And also, and this is a heads up to you, because I'm going to ask you for your help. I'm the chairman of the City of Annapolis Historic Preservation Commission, and so everything that's in the historic district is possibly under our purview. And so I'm always looking at it, and I'm going to be fascinated to see what your eye sees and the kind of architectural images you might create during Paint Annapolis. Okay, so let's start looking at your images because I really do. There's a strength in your images and the way in which you finish the canvas that's, as I said earlier, I don't associate with the typical plein air approach. So let's start with this one. Now, I'm going to tell you a little personal story after you tell us about where this is, why you chose it, and just tell us a little bit about what makes this painting, what you were trying to accomplish with it.
So, with all my work, I'm drawn to light and shadow is like the main subject of my work. And then I trip around Baltimore, wherever I am, and find subjects that are hit with great color, light, shadow. And then I love painting detail. And as you said, they're not your typical plein air pieces. I think a lot of people actually don't think that they're wholly plein air pieces, and that they're probably finished in a studio, but I actually paint every stroke of these pieces on location. So this particular painting probably required about 10 visits to the site. I get about 2 to 3 hours each visit. So I was just drawn to those shadows and all that great color. And this is in Patterson Park. I have a gallery in Baltimore. I recently, after 13 years, moved it from Fed Hill to an area called Highlandtown, which is not far from here. So I've been painting more on this side of town and have really been enjoying it.
Well, great. And I have to tell you that when I saw this image, I immediately recognized it because my son and daughter-in-law lived in Highlandtown for the first couple of years. They were married probably less than 5 blocks from this spot. And they and my wife and our grandson sat in that around that table under the umbrella on the far right many times.
Nice, nice.
And it's a wonderful little place. Is it still open as a restaurant?
Oh yeah. Yeah. In fact, they have a print of this hanging inside there.
Oh, well, good for them. Good
Yeah.
for them. And I see what you mean about the shadows. The way that you handled the shadows first on the stucco and then on the glass and on the white sign, that's really kind of, I think, a challenge to get all of those different surfaces and different degrees of reflectivity. And then, of course, the foliage that's more like what I think, at least I associate with the idea of painting out of doors.
Right. And those shadows change. And 1 minute you're looking at it and go, oh, wait, I like it better now,
Yeah,
15 minutes later. So I remember replacing those shadows a few times during the process of this painting.
yeah, yeah. When you say you go back to the same place number of times, and so you plan it, you've decided you're going to paint this place, and you have an idea of what you want to capture, and then are you limiting yourself from the beginning? I'm going to stay here for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, or is it just watching the light shift tells you when to stop?
It's watching the light shift. But I do usually I usually am able to stay on location at least 2 hours.
Oh.
So the only times I'm limited to usually 45 minutes are the when I'm trying to paint something that what's on what I call the shady side of the street, and the sun is
Mhm.
only hitting that side of the street early morning and late day on the longest days of the summer.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
certain sides of the street only are hit with sunlight first thing in the morning and late day, like around June 20th.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm able to do a couple of paintings on that side of the street every year. but most paintings I usually get about 2 hours or so.
Oh,
Where
well,
the
this
sun
is on
is,
the east side of Patterson Park, isn't it?
it is. It's on the east side of Patterson Park.
And so did that mean that you had to come back for this painting a number of times?
Oh, yes. I came back to this painting about 8 or 9 times.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
How do
I'm
you, how do you,
slow.
well, no, I don't think that's slow. Not, it's not important whether you're slow or not. It's that's just the way you do it. But
Right.
that seems to be a bigger challenge because don't you have to kind of reconnect or, you come back and the light's not quite the way you hoped it would be. And doesn't that add another level of complexity and difficulty?
Well, I guess it's just the way I have done it for now 30 years.
Yeah.
So, I have, especially this time of year, I put four paintings in my van and I have my early morning, my late morning, my early afternoon, and my late afternoon painting. So, back in the day, I would paint 12 hours a day, but I'm not as young as I used to be. So,
I hear
um,
you.
you know, so 2 to 3 hours on each painting. And actually, after that amount of time, I'm ready to go look at something else.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
find it fairly easy to jump back into a painting for the most part.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's I can't paint at all. I can't draw or paint. That's really why I'm a photographer. But that just seems, I don't know, it makes sense after hearing you talk about it. So let's look at another image. Your paintings, at least as I know them, are always full of light, and this is a fascinating composition. Seems to me, knowing Baltimore, it's absolutely Baltimore row houses. And there are some places in Annapolis that are similar. So, was this one that you could get all in one long session, or did you have to go back repeatedly for this one?
You would think it's only an 11 by, 14 by 11, but I started this painting once a year. We host a summer plein air event at the gallery, and when we open that show, we ask people just to come out and paint for that day. And
Hmm.
so I laid this painting in, and so every painting underneath has a pretty strong drawing that's painted in burnt sienna. So I did just that. That took me a couple of hours in itself for this piece. So that's all I really accomplished on that day. And then this painting required me at least two more visits to complete. So even something this size, it's just all that detail. I mean,
Yes.
the thing is
Yeah.
I like painting all that detail and I can't help myself. So
Nor should you. Looking at the
yeah,
results, there's no reason you should.
right.
Uh, my question here is, these are all pastels, or closely related to pastels in their tone, but that's not what Baltimore looks like. So it seems to me, or is there a little row somewhere that I've missed that has these beautiful arrangement of colors? Tell me
Well,
about your color selection.
this is what it looks like to me.
Okay, I
When the
guess
light hits it, this is what it looks like to me. This
yeah,
is, I don't, I honestly don't feel like I'm skewing it, but obviously I work in a very high key. Um, and this is how I see it.
yeah. Well, that's
Yeah,
really where I was going, what I was trying to
yeah.
find out. So you do have this vision that is bright and crisp, and obviously very well organized, as the next image I think will continue to show. This is a different part of, there's a lot of places in Baltimore like this. I'm thinking of when you go across North Avenue, I think some of the houses, the row houses are a lot like this there with the second floor bay. Is that what attracted you to this street, in addition to the light, the repetition of the steps and the stoops and the bays, and all of that? It's very architecturally solid.
Yes. Actually, this again is by Patterson Park. And this was the first like one of the first paintings I did when I moved over my gallery over to that area. And what I liked about this, besides all the things you just mentioned that drew me to it. I was just walking around the park and there were all these people, which I don't paint people, but all these neighbors like hanging out, and you could just tell that the vibe, they they all lived next to each other, but they were all hanging out at the neighbor's house with the red awning on the right. And you could just tell it was like a good block of neighbors. And it made me really want to paint this block and this block continues on and it looks very much the same. But again, then it comes down to where's the best layout. And I always do things they tell you not to do, like put something right in the center of a painting, like that middle house is right
Yeah,
in the
with the
center of that
green
painting.
trim. So
And
now I think I know where you painted this. Looking at the view that you've presented, if you are standing on the other side of the street, the behind would be some ball fields and like a little playground and lots of places for activity, right?
that's right.
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
know this place. And so
Yeah.
this gets me back to a theme that I was touching on with the other painting. Uh, are these the actual colors, for instance, of the window trim and the bays and the plants, or did you sort of orchestrate the colors so that it would hold together coloristically as you wanted it to?
Nope, that's what was there.
Wow.
I
Wow.
mean, if anything, I'll eliminate something, but for the most part, it's what I see.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you certainly have a solid vision. I mean, this is really concrete, but then the light is so vibrant. That's a nice kind of tension, I think. This is not at all. What, remember that I didn't tell you this, and so you probably don't know. I'm an art historian, and art historians have to classify everything and categorize everything. And this is not academically a plein air painting, except for the water.
I don't even know what possessed, well, actually, I know what possessed me, but the other thing about this piece is it's huge. It's 30 inches
Oh,
high and
yes,
60
yes.
inches wide. So it's massive to take outside and be right on the edge of the water. So not only did it not have to be sunny every day that I worked on it, but it had to also not be too windy, or else we all would have ended up in the
Mhm.
drink.
Uh-huh. So is
And
this a very large canvas for you then, unusually large?
it is. I mean, 60 inches by 30 inches is a large canvas to
Why'd you
be.
decide to do that?
Well, actually, I had a client who was interested in a large harbor piece, and then he decided, to do something else. And then I just sort of I decided I was going to do it anyway.
Hmm.
So, and I've painted the harbor a number of times through, the decades. But I had never done it from this perspective. And
So it was
then
a
I
new
just,
challenge.
yeah, it was just
Yeah.
a new challenge.
Yeah.
So, and it was. But this, even for being as large as it was, I think I was probably on location about a dozen times for this
Hmm.
piece.
Hmm.
Maybe one or two more than that. But
Well, it's a big challenge, literally and figuratively. All the reflections on the water, which you've captured in a very fluid and liquid way that adds something in addition to the rigidity of the architecture itself. And now, if what I said earlier about categorization didn't make you dislike art historians, if you didn't already, I'm going to ask you another one. This is classic art history stuff. Are there any painters that you particularly admire that work with similar subjects or a similar approach to their subjects?
that are working today.
No, just in
Oh,
from any time, any
oh.
place.
Well, of course I fell in love with Edward Hopper when I discovered him. Um, but and I always think about like these are Edward Hopper on happy pills. I mean, it's a whole different vibe and feel. Um, but I do remember like learning about his work, and then when I saw his one of his pieces in person, because you always see these like here, you see them in slides or whatever,
Yeah.
and then
Yep.
when you see them in person, and you're just then you really see the paint and all of that, you just go, oh my gosh, this is magic. And if I
Yes.
could ever, you know, really be a painter, it would be awesome. So
Well,
yeah.
that's yeah. My area of specialization was late 19th and early 20th century American painting and sculpture. And when I saw this, I thought Hopper. And what I would like to say is I understand now how you perhaps were affected by Hopper, but you've done it differently. It's you. It's not somebody trying to imitate Edward Hopper. But I take photographs of stuff that I think look vaguely like Hopper works. But I don't know. He's a great artist.
Yeah.
This is just a wonderful painting. And I'll also share with you, and I think Marissa may have heard me refer to this once before. One of the high points of my personal life was having the opportunity to take Senator Ted Kennedy around a Hopper retrospective at the National Gallery of Art for about
Mm.
2 hours. And the thing that made it so memorable for me is that not that I was spending the time with this famous person who I very much admired, but he actually helped me see things about Edward Hopper that I had never seen before as a scholar of
Mm.
that period. And I learned that he was an amateur painter
Oh,
and a student of Hopper in both the studio and in the library, you might say. So it's
wow.
just, you know, anybody that makes me think of Hopper, um, I know I like their work. I know exactly where this is. I've stood right there. And yet I don't think I've ever seen it represented quite this way. I know what makes me think that it's unlike anything else I've ever seen, but um, why did you choose this vantage point and this time of day?
Well, I absolutely love that building on the right. I've painted it in the past, but it has been a long, long time. And when I painted it, I would say probably over 20 years ago, it was in sunlight. I will say when I painted it, I was glad to be on the shady side of the street. In fact, it's called Summer Shade in Mount Vernon because it was very, very hot when I painted this last summer. Um, and I will say that one of the biggest challenges of this piece was painting all that shade on that side of on that face of that building because there's so much color in all that shade. And it might
Mhm.
be even hard to see, but that is probably more of a challenge for me painting all that shade color than all that bright color.
Yeah.
Um, but I liked all that, and then you kind of get all to that bright part where the monument is.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think that this is a beautiful and a wonderful interpretation because that is one of the few real Baroque revival, and I mean 17th century European Baroque style buildings that I know in Baltimore, which has, as you know, all these different wonderful buildings that people often have forgotten about. They don't think of that aspect of Baltimore. And then to show the monument itself, it's hard to take a monument like that and to show it in a different way that helps you appreciate its scale, its grandeur, so you've kind of all rolled that into light. Well, there's two more. This is the one that I especially love, though. I photographed it a couple of times, and you mentioned ghost walls. Is that the term you were using? Ghost something?
Oh,
Ghost signs.
oh, right. Yeah, and I mean, I actually, as a young person, I used to paint signs and I mean, it's not like I was a formal sign painter, but I grew up in an advertising family, so we
Oh,
used to do a lot of hand lettering of stuff, and so I've always really loved lettering, and so anyway, whenever I have a chance to do signs or anything like that, I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah.
But I love I've painted the building that's in the foreground in the past also, but the Stratford Hotel, I really enjoyed painting this view of it. Um,
Yeah. There's those ghost signs all over Baltimore,
oh, there
as
are.
you know, and
Yeah.
I know I take a photograph of them anytime I see a new one that I've not seen before. So that's really interesting. And this is another little sidebar. You said you're from an advertising family. You mean
Yes.
professional advertising design people?
Yep.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Virginia Beach, and my father's advertising agency was in Norfolk. And actually, my younger sister, now runs it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the history of American advertising design?
Not
Like,
really, no.
oh, okay. The reason I ask you that is there was a Philadelphia um, advertising designer. He eventually became the lead designer for the Saturday Evening Post, and he also was an artist for the Post. A man named Henry McCarter, and he collected. He had the largest privately owned collection of early European modernist work in America at one time. He had become so wealthy and knew what was happening in Paris, in the late 19th, early 20th century, so personally that he started to buy Picasso, Matisse, and all these kind of people. But his work as an artist is more like this,
Oh.
only in pencil or in pen and ink. Um,
Mhm.
I just thought maybe you'd had a family connection with somebody like him.
Oh.
Uh,
Mhm.
well, this is another. I think we see what you're doing, and now let's look at that one last image. This is just one of those encapsulations of something that's simple but so beautiful and poised so completely, I think, in your presentation here. And it also, I think, will make a little segue into, is this more the kind of thing that you will be doing in Annapolis?
Yeah, yes. In fact, I'm thinking of the pieces I did at the last Annapolis event I was in. And I remember there was one that was actually a door and a window, much more historic staircase leading up to the door
Mhm.
with lanterns on either side. And but yes. I love doing these kind of straight on. Well, obviously I love doing perspective too, but there's something really great working out these compositions that are just straight on and then dealing with those lights and shadows on those compositions.
Well, here the shadows, I think the shadows of the railing do so much to create a sense of depth optically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Uh, but still, overall, there's that flat plane. Anyway, this is a beautiful jewel-like painting, in my opinion. So, um, I am going to be taking photographs of you and the others as you paint to be posted for the publicity and information about Paint Annapolis. So, I look forward to finding you along the streets somewhere next month. So it's been great getting to know you and your work and talking with you. So thanks for enduring it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. See you in Annapolis.
Thank you, Marissa. Thanks for your help. And
Bye,
you were
Marissa.
going to ask a question, weren't you, Marissa? And I cut you off.
It's okay. You actually kind of asked it for me, and it's Crystal, basically what brought you back to paint Annapolis year after year, and why you love Annapolis, considering that you mostly focus on like the beautiful architecture in Baltimore. But I believe you answered that, so thank
Oh,
you.
okay.
But one thing I did want to say, I've been working with MFA for about 3 years now, and I've loved your work ever since I first started working with them at Paint and Annapolis. So this is a wonderful treat for me to be able to learn more about you and your work and what inspires you about Baltimore since I've lived there for a couple of years too.
Well,
And I love
thank
just
you.
how you really bring out the charm of Baltimore. It's really
Yes.
beautiful.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that so much. Thank you.
All right. I hope everybody gets to see this and it encourages them to come out and meet Crystal and see her work and enjoy it. So thank you both. and enjoy the rest of your evening.